Good morning once again and welcome to the course Principles of Economics. If you recall, in our last session, we were talking about how markets are usually a good way to organize economic activities. And then by economic activities, basically what we wanted to mean that market decides what good to produce, how much to produce, how to produce, and who will buy them. And all these decisions, all these things are decided by a single most instrument which is used by the market, that is price. So, price actually decides everything. So, when we go to the market, whether we will buy a product or not, the buyer looks at the price and decides whether to buy at all. And if the buyer decides to buy, how much, that is decided by the price. Similarly, the producer looks at the price and decides whether to supply that product or not. And if the producer wants to supply, how much would be the supply, that is also determined by the price. So, that way market organized all these economic activities. But then, as I mentioned yesterday, that why is it mentioned usually? So, that means there are cases where market actually fails to organize economic activities efficiently, and we need government intervention. So, that means sometimes government intervention is good for organizing economic activities. Now, if you think that for market to become successful in doing these activities, we need something called property right. That means property right gives an incentive to the economic agents to own resources, to make production, and to maintain the quality of the goods and services that she produces. For example, when the farmer is thinking to produce certain crops, the farmer must be assured that someone else should not come and take all the products without paying him, right? So, no one should come and steal all the agricultural products that the farmer has produced. Similarly, a shop owner must be assured that everyone will come and buy the product and pay for it. No one will come and steal all the products without paying anything. So, that means there should be a law and order that will provide property rights for all these goods and services to their owners. And who will ensure that property rights? It is the government, right? The law and order is set by the government, and that is the rule of the government, that government ensures property right for each and every product that is produced in an economy, right? So, that is the role of government. Government has uh, some other activities. If you recall, one more interesting point about the market economy is that when we go to the market, everyone looks at the price and decides how much to sell or how much to buy without thinking about others, right? So, all of us, all the individuals, they behave uh, rationally, and their ultimate objective is to maximize their utility, and they behave in a selfish way. So, they don't consider anything else about others, and that way market ensures that social welfare is also maximized, right? So, long back, famous economists Adam Smith, in the Wealth of Nations, what he mentioned, that there is some kind of invisible hand that helps price. As I mentioned earlier, the market uses the single most powerful instrument, price, to organize economic activities. And there is some kind of invisible hand in the market that helps price to adjust towards the demand and supply. So that means if there is oversupply of a good, price will adjust downward so that market will clear. If there is excess demand in the market, price will shoot up so that market clears. So that invisible hand actually promote general economic well-being, even though individually all of us we are acting in a selfish way. That is the beauty of market mechanism, and that is the beauty of the invisible hand that the forefather of economics Adam Smith mentioned long back in 1776, right? So the invisible hand, as I mentioned, works through the price system. The interaction of buyers and sellers determines the prices, and this is again important, each price reflects the goods value to the buyers and the cost of producing the good. Okay, so the price reflects our willingness to pay. So that means how much we are ready to pay for a product. That information is there in the price. When the price is too much, that means there is lot of value for the product. It's very simple thing to understand. Unless there is huge demand, price cannot go up, right? So price basically shows there is lot of demand for the product. So that means people are valuing the product. At the same time, at that price, if there is a supply, so that means suppliers are also able to meet their cost of production. That is why they are supplying at that particular price. So that means price reflects both the goods value to the buyers as well as the cost of producing the good. That is the beauty of this price mechanism, and that is why price is the single most instrument used by the market to organize economic activities. So price guides self-interested households and firms to make decision in such a way that social welfare is maximized. Even though individually we are selfish, we are not thinking about the others, market ensures the interaction of these individual buyers and sellers who themselves are not socially oriented but very selfish in their decision making. It ensures maximum social welfare. Okay, but there are some preconditions which are implied in the system. First of all, the market what we are talking about, the market is competitive. That means there are too many buyers and too many suppliers, so that one individual's decision either to buy or to sell doesn't affect the market outcome. And there is a role of the government also in this context. Government ensures smooth functioning of the market through assigning property right by enforcing law and order. Okay, no one is afraid that his or her product will be encroached by someone illegally. That assurance is given by the government. And that is where now we are going to talk about how government can actually sometimes improve the market outcome. So what is the important role, as I mentioned? Enforce property right with police and courts. Okay, people are less inclined to work, produce, invest or purchase if large risk of their property being stolen. Okay, so no one will work, no one will produce, no one will invest if there is a risk that their property would be stolen. And market cannot function in that type of atmosphere where there is no law and order, people are scared of producing, thinking their property would be stolen by someone. Okay, that enforcement is done by the government. Then there are two other contexts that we are going to discuss. One is called market failure. So that means when market fails to allocate society's resources efficiently. There are two important reasons for that market failure. First one is called externalities. So that means when production and consumption of goods affect B standards. B standards means a third party who is not directly involved in that economic activity, but it is either positively or negatively impacting the third person, for which she is neither paying anything nor being compensated. I will give a simple example to understand. Let us say pollution. A firm is making, let us say, cement and generating a lot of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide in the process and polluting the nearby environment. So that means the people who are residing in that locality, they are not directly involved in that cement production, but still they are getting affected by the pollution generated from that cement company. And the cement company is not paying or compensating the local people as they are suffering from the pollution. So that means there is no compensation given, and as a result of which the firm is thinking only about their private cost of production. The firm is not thinking about the social cost or the damage cost for the pollution which is getting generated. So obviously what will happen? The firm will try to overproduce. So if the market alone works, so cement production would be more than what is socially desirable, because the firm is thinking the optimal amount of production, profit maximizing amount of output is decided only by the private cost of production, material cost, labor cost, capital cost and all these things. But firm is not at all considering the damage cost to the society for the pollution. Obviously, in that case, the firm will tend to overproduce, and market fails basically to determine the optimality. Okay, so in presence of negative externality, the firm is overproducing. Similarly, when there is positive externality, the economic agents will try to produce, try to supply which is less than optimal. For example, when you go for vaccination, taking vaccination for myself not only helps my health but also prevents the disease from getting spreaded across the community. But as I told you, economic agents are selfish and self-utility or welfare maximizing. So when I am taking vaccine, when I am deciding whether to take the vaccine or not, I am comparing the cost of that vaccination and only my own benefit. And it may so happen that many times, if you consider my own benefit, either I will not go for the vaccination if the cost is so high, or if I go, then there would be many very less people motivated for vaccination. So what we have to do then? There is under supply. So less people are getting vaccinated and government has to intervene in the form of giving subsidy for vaccination. So in case of negative externality, government intervention is required in the form of imposing tax, so that the firm can now internalize the cost of generating pollution. In the case of positive externality, cost of production will go down if subsidy is given. So externality is a context wherein market fails to achieve optimality, right? Secondly, market power. If you recall just now what I told, that market maximizes social welfare in a context when the market is competitive in nature. There are too many buyers and too many sellers. No one has any control. No single buyer or seller has any control over the market outcome. So, that means even if a particular buyer doesn't buy, even if a particular seller doesn't supply, that does not actually impact the equilibrium price and output determined in the market. But let us assume there is a case that there is only a single buyer or single seller. When there is a single seller, that situation is called a monopoly market. So, that means the price which reflects the value of the product or cost of products in a competitive market fails to signal the same information. Because in monopoly market, the seller has absolute control over the price and quantity. So, the seller can decide either the quantity and then price should be determined, or can determine the price and accordingly supply the product. And price would be much more than what the buyers actually attach value for that particular thing, because buyer has no control. There is only one seller for that. So, price tend to be higher than the value of its value attached by the customers. Similarly, if there is only one buyer, then the buyer will have a lot of bargaining power. Even if the good demand certain price, the buyer may not pay so much, because there is only one buyer and seller has no alternative rather than to sell the product only to that particular buyer, right. So, in both the cases, price does not give a proper signal about its value to the buyer or cost of production to the seller. So, these are the two contexts, externalities and market power, in which market actually fails to allocate the resource efficiently, and we call that situation as market failure. Okay. In such cases, public policy may promote efficiency, right. So, government may alter market outcome to promote equity. All right. So, if market distribution, if the market's distribution of economic well-being is not desirable, then tax or welfare policies can change how the economic pie is divided. So, one thing we must keep in mind, that when the market decides the price and quantity, market is not deciding about how it will get distributed among all the individuals living in a society. So, many individuals may left out because they do not have proper endowment to enter into the market process, right. So, as a result of which, what will happen? The people who are wealthier, they only will be able to enter into the market and gain from the market exchange. Others would be completely left out, and we need then appropriate uh, public policies to promote equity, okay, to promote equity. So, but one thing we have to keep in mind, that not all the times public policies are desirable for making the societies better off, because we must keep in mind who is making the policies. It is the policymakers or politicians. So, many times policies are framed to favor the politically inclined people, okay, to 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 uh, 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 the allocation is done in such a way that only politically inclined people are getting better off from such kind of allocation, because they are the people who are framing public policies. Okay. So, we learning of principles of economics then will help us to judge whether a particular policy is desirable for the society, or it is framed to satisfy the demand for those politically inclined people. Okay, so that will help us to understand the actual motive for each and every public policies that are framed. Okay, so these are some situation. In each of these following situation, what is the government's role? Does the government's intervention improve the outcome? So let us take situation number 1, public school from KG to 12, right? Workplace safety and regulation, then public highways, patent laws which allows drug companies to charge high prices for life-saving drugs, right? So when we talk about public school from KG to 12, primary education, what is the role of government? Generally, primary education is, and from KG to 12, if it is subsidized, then many poor people will come for enrollment. Okay, because education is also something which not only benefits that particular individual, but also make the society better off. Okay, but if it is costly, not many people will be able to enroll for this. All right. So as a result of which there is subsidy given, so government intervention can actually improve the outcome. Workplace safety regulations. Okay, if there is safety regulation enforced by the government in workplace, then many people will feel safe by participating in the labor force. Public highways, huge investment required for this kind of infrastructure. And private people, that means private entities, businessmen, they may not find it suitable for putting their money for making public highways. And there is a role of government also in providing those infrastructure. Patent law, as I told you, that why is patent required? Because patent gives the company a property right that for a particular period of time only that company is allowed to produce the particular drug, right? So if everyone starts imitating immediately after the first launch of the product, then the company, the drug company, may not be able to uh, get its money back, because R&D in drug invention requires a lot of money to be invested, right? So some life-saving drugs requires lot of money for its R&D. So that's why once the drug comes into the market, the particular company which has invented this should enjoy the benefit for a period of time. And government, that is why, provides patent to that particular company, so that others are not allowed to produce that particular drug for a certain period of time. Okay, so in all these cases we see that government intervention actually improve the outcome. So far in all these principles, if you look at whatever we have discussed, they were basically targeted at, they were discussing how the individual economic agents are taking decisions. So that means decision makings at the micro level, either for a particular person or a particular firm. So those principles were guiding micro level decision making. Okay. But if we need to think about how the economy as a whole works, then we need some other principles which are different than the principles which we have learned so far. And these principles, what we are going to discuss now, that is why they are called macroeconomic principles, because they give some kind of idea about how the country as a whole works. Now, principle number 8, what it says, that a country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. What does it mean? See, at the individual level, a particular individual standard of living, that means what that particular individual will eat, where will the particular individual sleep, what type of vehicle that individual will use, what type of clothing that particular individual will wear. These are called standard of living. Where will that person go for vacation? These are all standard of living. And that standard of living depends on that particular individual's income. And how income is decided? The income is decided by the individual's ability to produce either goods or services. As a teacher, I produce services in terms of teaching and research. That decides my income. A farmer's income is decided by how much the farmer is able to produce agricultural outputs. A firm's income is decided how much the firm is able to produce the output. Same logic is applicable at the country level. A country's standard of living, let's say India, the standard of living of all the citizens living in India depends on India's ability to produce goods and services. If India is able to produce more goods and services, India will generate more income, which is called national income, and that will determine the country mean standard of living. If you look at, there are countries which are called developed countries. For example, United Nations, United States, France, Japan, Sweden, these countries are called developed countries. So, they have more ability to produce goods and services and thereby generate more income. So, per capita income of those countries are very high, as a result of which the standard of living of those countries are also very high. But if you look at countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and many of the African countries, they are not able to produce that much. As a result of which, per capita income is very low and standard of living is also very low. That is what is explained here. So, there is huge variation in living standard across countries and over time. Okay, across countries and over a period of time. The country might be poor now or developing now, but 10 years, 20 years or 50 years down the line, the country may become a rich country or developed country. Okay, so average income in rich countries is more than 10 times average income of poorer countries. Okay, 10 times, almost 10 times higher than the poorer countries. If you compare the per capita income of the United States and the per capita income of these countries like India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, then African countries, it's a huge variation, and that can explain the huge variation in their standard of living as well. Okay. Even if you consider the same country, the United States standard of living today is about 8 times higher than what it was earlier, that means 100 years ago. So, over a period of time for the same country or for a particular period across the country, there is huge variation in the standard of living. That is what I wanted to mean. And productivity determines the country's income. Why productivity all of a sudden? See, what I said, country's ability to produce goods and services will determine income and thereby standard of living. But we have already discussed that resources are limited. For producing goods and services, if a particular country wants to produce more resources, labor, capital, material, more resources are required. But resources are limited for the country. Then how can you get more income? That means the country must produce more output from a given level of inputs, and that is called productivity. So, by using 1 unit of labor, how much output you are going to generate, that is called labor productivity. Using 1 unit of capital, how much output you are able to generate, that is called capital productivity. Using 1 unit of material, how much output you are going to generate, that is called material productivity. And if we take all the inputs taken together, then economists, they have defined another measure of productivity, which is called total factor productivity, right? Total factor productivity, which considers that all the inputs are scarce. There are two measures of productivity. One is called partial productivity, another one is called total factor productivity. So, partial productivity means, let us say I am talking about marginal productivity of labor, MPL, which is what is the total output divided by, that means if we consider let us say labor productivity, let us say instead of marginal, let us say it is a labor productivity, total output by total labor, which is called labor productivity. Okay. Similarly, Q by K, it is called capital productivity. And if you take marginal, then MPL, these are called average productivity. Average productivity of labor, average productivity of capital, and then marginal productivity of labor is defined by change in total output and by change in labor. Similarly, MPK is change in output, change in this. Now, whatever you take, either average or marginal, these are called partial productivity. Now, labor productivity may go up by increasing the intensive by deploying more amount of capital, because how the laborers will become productive, we need to provide them machines and technology. So, partial productivity measure does not consider the relative scarcity of other factors. That is why economists, they have come up with another measure, which is called total factor productivity, TFP. So, I am not going into the detail of its measurement, but this particular measure assumes that all the factors of production are actually scarce. So, what is the country's objective then? We need to, since the factors of productions are scarce, capital, labor, material, everything is scarce. So, what we need to do? We need to produce more output from a given level of inputs. If more output is produced from a given level of labor, we will say that labor productivity has increased. If more amount of output is produced from a given amount of capital, we say that capital productivity has increased. So, productivity has to improve so that the country can produce more from a given level of resources. If you look at the productivity of labor, capital and other inputs in the developed nations, we see that productivity is much higher in those countries. Why this is so? Because they have enough resources to provide, enough training to provide to the laborers, so that laborers become so effective, so productive, they produce more output and they are able to generate more income, and that can actually explain why the standard of living is higher in those nations, right, in those countries. So, we need to remember this, that the most important determinant of living standard is productivity, the amount of goods and services produced per unit of labor. Here we are talking about labor productivity, but it can be capital productivity, material productivity, anything. Okay. So, basically we consider most of the cases labor productivity. Okay. How much amount of output you are able to produce from one unit of labor, and that will determine the productivity of other factors as well. Because capital alone, material alone cannot produce anything, we need labor, and that labor has to be skillful. And how will you provide skill? You need to provide quality education. That is why productivity depends on the equipment, skill and technology available. So, equipment means capital. How will you get capital? You need to have income. More capital formulation, capital accumulation will come through saving and investment. How people will save more? If they have more income, right? So that means productivity depends on equipment and also its skill. Skill will come from education. Government has to invest money again. So that means productivity will determine income, and in other way income again will determine productivity. So there is a two-way relationship between productivity and country's income. Then other factors like labor union, competition from abroad have far less impact on living standard, right? So they are not so important in living standard, but the important factor is basically the productivity.